"So tell us again," Marguerite Ashdown said, swirling her champagne with 2 fingers hooked delicately around the stem. "Where exactly is your father tonight? Or should we simply assume, as everyone here already has, that he never intended to show up at all?" The laughter that followed rippled outward from the head table, like a stone dropped into still water, spreading through 300 guests, dressed in silk and tailored wool, gathered beneath the vaulted glass ceiling of the Sterling Grand Ballroom for what was supposed to be my engagement celebration. What would you do if your future mother-in-law humiliated you about your absent father in front of every important person in her social circle, at your own engagement party, under lights bright enough to make certain nobody missed your face as it happened? What would you do if the room went quiet in that particular cruel way? Rooms go quiet when everyone is waiting to see if you will cry, and the man beside you, the man who claimed to love you, said nothing at all. I did not cry. I set down my glass with a hand that did not shake, and I looked at Marguerite Ashdown's smug, powdered face, and I said nothing, because I had learned, across a lifetime, longer and stranger than anyone in that room could have imagined, that silence before a storm is not weakness, it is preparation. They had no idea, not one soul beneath that glass ceiling, that in exactly 10 minutes, the entire block surrounding the Sterling Grand Hotel would be sealed by armored vehicles, bearing a crest none of them would recognize until it was far too late to matter. They had no idea that my father was not absent because he had abandoned me, or because he was ashamed of me, or because, as Marguerite had suggested more than once in the preceding months, he simply did not exist. They had no idea that my father was, at that exact moment, stepping out of a bulletproof limousine parked outside those doors, and that he ruled a nation with more gold reserves than the combined net worth of every family in that ballroom. Let me take you back to where this began, 3 years earlier, to a woman named Clara Winters. Clara Winters worked as a hospital records archivist, a quiet and unglamorous job that involved digitizing decades of patient files in a windowless basement office at Fairhaven Medical Center. She wore scrubs in muted colors, kept her hair in a simple braid, and drove a 12-year-old sedan with a persistent rattle in the passenger door. She was 28 years old, and by every visible measure, she was an ordinary woman living an ordinary life, which was precisely the point, because Clara Winters was a name I had built for myself, brick by careful brick, to protect a truth I was not yet ready to carry in public. My real name is Serafina Adeline Cross, and my father is Emperor Theodore Alaric Cross, sovereign ruler of the Aurelian Crownlands, a nation whose sovereign wealth fund manages assets that stretch across 4 continents and whose royal family has occupied its throne for over 6 centuries without interruption. I grew up inside palace walls thick with history and thin with genuine warmth, surrounded by ministers and advisors and a rotating cast of approved companions, each one selected for political advantage rather than personal compatibility. By the time I turned 25, I had watched enough calculated smiles cross enough calculated faces to develop an allergy to flattery so severe I could detect it from across a crowded room. I asked my father for time away, not forever, just long enough to discover whether an ordinary version of love was available to a woman like me, a woman whose face appeared on currency, whose engagement would be a matter of national economic policy rather than personal choice. He understood better than most, having lost my mother to illness when I was 12 and having spent the years since surrounded by people whose affection he could never fully trust. He granted me leave quietly, through channels so private that only 4 people beyond himself knew the truth of where I had gone. I became Clara Winters. I learned to enjoy grocery shopping without an escort, riding a city bus without anyone standing 3 paces behind me, and eating a sandwich alone on a park bench without a single person calculating my net worth from across the grass. I met Jonathan Ashdown at a coffee shop near the hospital, A modest place with mismatched chairs and burnt espresso, where he was reading a financial newspaper and asked, almost shyly, if the empty chair across from me was taken. He worked in commercial banking, junior level at the time, ambitious but not yet successful in any way that would have drawn attention from the world I had left behind. He was patient in conversation, asked thoughtful questions, and remembered small details. My preference for oat milk, the fact that I disliked loud restaurants, the name of the street where I grew up, which of course was a careful fabrication I had rehearsed until it felt like truth. For nearly 2 years, Jonathan Ashdown made me believe that ordinary love was not only possible, but already mine. He proposed during a quiet weekend trip to the coast. No witnesses, no cameras. A modest ring he told me he had saved 4 months of his salary to afford. I said yes, and I meant it entirely, believing I had finally found the thing I had left the palace searching for. Someone who wanted Clara Winters, archivist, rather than Serafina Cross, heir to a throne. Then Jonathan's career began to accelerate, buoyed by a series of promotions at his firm. And with that acceleration came his mother, Marguerite Ashdown, who entered our engagement like a blade, sliding quietly into silk. Marguerite was the kind of woman who had married into modest wealth decades earlier and spent every year since manufacturing the appearance of belonging somewhere far grander. She wore Chanel to breakfast, carried a rotating collection of handbags she referenced constantly and unprompted, and measured every person she met by a private ledger of visible net worth. She met me for the first time at a family dinner in her sprawling townhouse and looked at my modest cardigan with an expression of polite, devastating disappointment that she did not bother to disguise. "Jonathan tells me you organize old paperwork," she said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. "How practical. And your family? Your father specifically. Jonathan mentioned you don't speak of him much." "He's away often," I said carefully. "His work keeps him traveling." "How convenient," she said, and smiled in a way that made the word into an accusation. The cruelty accumulated steadily after that evening, delivered always with a smile, always constructed so that objecting would make me appear oversensitive rather than her appear unkind. She introduced me to her friends as Jonathan's little charity case, a phrase she deployed so often it stopped registering as unusual to the people around us. She commented on my shoes, my modest apartment, the age of my car, always circling back, eventually, to the absence of my father, a subject she treated like a wound she enjoyed reopening at regular intervals. At one dinner party, she asked loudly, in front of a dozen guests, whether my father was in prison or simply too embarrassed to claim you, and laughed as though this were an acceptable joke rather than a cruelty dressed in a party dress. Then came Priscilla Vane, Jonathan's college girlfriend, whose family owned a chain of luxury automobile dealerships across the eastern seaboard. She re-entered Jonathan's life through his firm's newest client relationship, and suddenly she was present at every function that mattered, seated beside him at his firm's holiday gala, while I sat 3 tables away, laughing at his jokes, with her hand lingering on his forearm a beat too long. Marguerite adored her instantly and completely, discussing venues and guest lists with her as though the wedding being planned belonged to Priscilla rather than to me. I confronted Jonathan once, quietly, in the kitchen of the apartment we shared. I asked him why his mother treated my missing father as a weapon to be used against me at every possible opportunity. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I had come to recognize as his signal for imminent capitulation. "Clara, please. My mother's approval matters for my career at the firm. Her connections got me the Vane account. Can you just, I don't know, deflect the questions about your dad instead of getting upset? It's not that big a deal. Just smile and change the subject. Deflect the questions about your dad, as though my father's absence, a fact I could not fully explain to him without revealing everything, was a minor inconvenience rather than a wound." Marguerite reopened deliberately, repeatedly, with surgical intent. I should have left that night. I did not. I told myself the engagement party would resolve things, that once Marguerite saw how seriously Jonathan and I intended this marriage, her cruelty would soften into something resembling acceptance. I was catastrophically wrong. The engagement party was held at the Sterling Grand Hotel, a 19th century building restored with obsessive attention to its original grandeur, crowned by a vaulted glass ceiling that filtered evening light into shifting patterns across the marble floor below. 300 guests filled that ballroom, most of them drawn from Marguerite's social circle and Jonathan's professional network, dressed in silk and cashmere and the particular ostentatious jewelry favored by people who need everyone in the room to understand exactly what they can afford. I had told Jonathan weeks earlier that my father would not be able to attend due to travel obligations, a story I had rehearsed with him many times before. Always careful, always vague enough to avoid direct lies I could not later defend. Marguerite had seized on this absence with the enthusiasm of a predator finding an unguarded wound, mentioning it in nearly every conversation leading up to the event, cultivating an audience for the humiliation she was clearly planning to deliver in public. The evening began pleasantly enough. String musicians playing near tall windows, servers moving through the crowd with trays of champagne, the particular golden lighting that expensive event planners specialize in creating. I wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated, nothing that would have signaled to anyone in that room that I had once worn a diamond tiara at state funerals attended by foreign monarchs. The toast came an hour into the evening. Marguerite rose from the head table, glass in hand, and the room quieted with the practiced attentiveness of guests who understood a performance was about to begin. "I want to say a few words about our newest addition to the family," she began, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "Clara has been such a, surprising choice for Jonathan. We've all wondered, of course, about her background, her family. Specifically," and here she paused, letting the silence stretch with theatrical precision, "her father, who has managed to avoid every single family function for the past 2 years. One does start to wonder." A ripple of laughter moved through pockets of the crowd, cruel and quiet, the laughter of people who had decided collectively that my discomfort was tonight's entertainment. "So tell us again," she continued, turning to me directly now, swirling her champagne with 2 fingers hooked delicately around the stem. "Where exactly is your father tonight? Or should we simply assume, as everyone here already has, that he never intended to show up at all?" The laughter that followed was louder this time, spreading through the full 300 guests, and I felt the heat of humiliation trying to climb up through my chest. I looked at Jonathan, seated beside me, hoping for some defense, some acknowledgement that his mother had crossed a line no amount of professional advantage could justify. He looked down at his plate. He said nothing. "He must be very important," Priscilla added from her seat near the head table, her voice carrying the particular sweetness of a woman enjoying herself immensely, "to be too busy for his own daughter's engagement. Or perhaps," and she smiled at Marguerite with practiced coordination, "there simply isn't a father to speak of. Some women invent these things, you know. It happens more often than you'd think." I set down my glass with a hand that did not shake. I looked at Marguerite's smug, powdered face, at Priscilla's delighted smile, at Jonathan's downcast eyes, and I said nothing at all, because 300 guests in silk and jewelry were waiting to see me break, and I had spent my entire life learning that the moment before you reveal your true strength is not the moment to reveal your true weakness. "Nothing to say, dear?" Marguerite pressed, savoring the silence, mistaking it for defeat. "That's all right. We understand. Some families simply don't discuss certain things. It must be so difficult, carrying that kind of secret around." I reached into my small clutch, the one Marguerite had once described as a bit plain for an occasion like this, and withdrew a phone, black and unmarked, connected to exactly one number I had prayed for 3 years I would never need to dial in the middle of a party. I dialed. It rang once. "Father," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly through the sudden hush that had fallen over the nearest tables. It's time. Confusion flickered across Marguerite's face. She glanced at Jonathan, who shrugged, equally lost, still apparently unable to grasp that the woman he had spent 2 years calling Clara had just placed a call that would end his family's entire way of life within the hour. For the first several minutes after that call, nothing appeared to change. The string quartet continued playing. Servers continued circulating with trays of champagne. Marguerite, emboldened by my silence, launched into another round of pointed commentary about absent fathers and convenient excuses, playing to her audience with the confidence of a woman who believed she held every card at the table. Then the sound began to reach the ballroom from outside, distant at first, a low mechanical hum building steadily beneath the music, the unmistakable rhythm of many engines approaching in disciplined formation. A few guests near the tall windows turned their heads toward the sound, frowning, uncertain what they were hearing. The hum grew louder, resolving into the specific low register of heavy vehicles moving through the streets surrounding the Sterling Grand Hotel, converging from multiple directions simultaneously. Through the windows, guests nearest the glass could see headlights sweeping across the building's facade, dozens of them, arranged with a precision that no ordinary traffic pattern could explain. The grand doors at the rear of the ballroom, tall and gilded, designed for elegant entrances rather than dramatic interruptions, were pushed open from outside, and cold night air poured into the overheated room, along with the sight of black uniformed men moving into formation along the ballroom's perimeter, sidearms visible at their hips, earpieces glinting under the chandelier light, moving with the fluid discipline of soldiers who had trained for decades for exactly this kind of arrival. Through the hotel's tall windows, the guests seated nearest could see that the street outside had transformed entirely. Dozens of black armored vehicles, each bearing on its hood a small gold crest, an eagle beneath a crown, had sealed the entire block surrounding the hotel. News helicopters, summoned by someone with reach far beyond anything in that ballroom, had already begun circling overhead, their searchlights sweeping across the building's ornate facade. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marguerite's confident posture crumbled into visible confusion. Jonathan's face had drained to the color of the white tablecloth. Through the center of the tactical formation, walking the length of the ballroom with unhurried, absolute authority, came a man I had not seen in person for nearly 3 years, though I had spoken to him weekly through encrypted calls made from the supply closet at Fairhaven Medical Center during my lunch breaks. Emperor Theodore Alaric Cross, 68 years old, silver-haired, dressed not in ceremonial robes, but in a charcoal suit of impeccable, understated tailoring that nonetheless commanded more authority than any crown could have added to it. Beside him walked 2 attorneys carrying leather portfolios, thick with documents, and a woman I recognized instantly as the director of the Aurelian Sovereign Wealth Fund. He walked past 300 frozen guests and stopped directly in front of me. He looked at my face, at the untouched champagne glass on the table, at Marguerite's stunned expression, and something in his stern bearing softened, just barely, just for me. "Daughter," he said, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's excellent acoustics, the particular weight of a man who had addressed parliaments and never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. "I apologize for arriving later than I intended. Traffic protocols for a formation this size take time to coordinate." The word landed across the ballroom like a dropped chandelier. "Daughter." Guests who had been laughing minutes earlier now stared with open mouth, the calculations happening visibly behind their eyes. Marguerite's voice came out strangled. "Daughter of what exactly?" The emperor turned to her slowly, the deliberate motion of a man acknowledging someone he has already decided how to handle. "Emperor Theodore Cross," he said, "sovereign ruler of the Aurelian crownland. The woman you have spent this evening humiliating in front of 300 witnesses, questioning the existence of her own father, mocking her for a family history you understood nothing about, is Her Imperial Highness Serafina Adeline Cross, heir apparent to a treasury larger than the combined assets of every guest in this room. Jonathan made a sound between a laugh and a gasp, the particular noise of a man watching his entire understanding of reality dissolve in real time. That's not possible. Clara works at a hospital. She drives a car that rattles. She clips coupons. She was hiding from people exactly like your mother, the Emperor said, his voice cold enough to frost the crystal chandeliers overhead. People who mock what they do not understand and humiliate what they cannot control. You have all just confirmed, publicly, in front of cameras and helicopters, precisely why she was right to hide. One of the attorneys stepped forward, opening his portfolio, extracting a document bound in deep navy leather. "Mrs. Ashdown," he said, addressing Marguerite directly, formal and unhurried, "your husband's investment firm currently manages several accounts through banking institutions in which the Aurelian Sovereign Wealth Fund holds significant controlling interest. As of this evening, following documented public conduct unbecoming toward a member of the Aurelian imperial family, those relationships are being formally severed, effective immediately." Marguerite's face lost whatever color remained in it. "You cannot simply, that's not how banking relationships, we have contracts." "Your contracts," the Treasury Director said, stepping forward with the crisp efficiency of someone who delivers financial ruin as a matter of routine business, contain standard clauses permitting immediate termination in cases of reputational risk. Your family's public humiliation of an imperial highness, broadcast now across several news networks whose helicopters you may have noticed circling outside, qualifies rather comprehensively. Jonathan's employer, seated 3 tables away and listening with visible horror, rose from his chair. "Jonathan," he said, his voice tight, "the Vane account, the one you closed last quarter, it runs through Aurelian-affiliated lending. If this relationship is severed, it already has been," the attorney confirmed. "Mr. Ashdown's firm will find its access to that credit facility, and several others like it, terminated by end of business tomorrow." Priscilla, who had gone very still throughout this unraveling, attempted to rise from her seat and slip toward the ballroom's side exit. She did not make it far. "Miss Vane," the Treasury Director said, without raising her voice, "your family's dealership network carries substantial floor plan financing through institutions with Aurelian-affiliated credit lines. Given your direct participation in this evening's conduct, that financing is being flagged for immediate review. Your father will be receiving a call within the hour." Priscilla's face went the color of the tablecloths behind her. I finally rose from my seat, my navy dress catching the chandelier light, and looked at the woman who had spent 2 years mocking a father she knew nothing about. "You wanted to know where my father was," I said to Marguerite, my voice quiet, but carrying clearly through the stunned silence of the ballroom. "He was governing a nation of 40 million people. He was signing treaties. He was doing the work of a man who has spent his entire life in service to something larger than a dinner party. And you stood in this room and suggested I invented him because you could not fathom that someone in your immediate presence might belong to a world entirely beyond your understanding." Marguerite's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. "You mocked my father's absence," I continued, without once considering that his absence might be explained by something other than shame. "That is the arrogance of people who have never had to imagine a world larger than the one they have decorated for themselves." Jonathan stepped forward, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Serafina, please, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, I would have said something tonight. I would have defended you." "You didn't need to know who I was to defend me," I said. "You needed only to be a decent man. You failed that test long before tonight, Jonathan. Tonight simply made the failure visible to everyone in this room." He dropped to his knees on the marble floor, an act so theatrical that even Marguerite looked away in second-hand embarrassment. "Please, we can fix this. I love you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You loved the version of me that required no defending," I said. "The version of me that let your mother humiliate her without consequence, because consequence never seemed possible. That version no longer exists. Do not mistake panic for love, Jonathan. I have watched desperate men my entire life. I know precisely what it looks like. I turned to my father, who watched this entire scene with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had waited 3 years to defend his daughter's dignity exactly as it deserved. "I'm ready to go home, Father," I said. He offered his arm. I took it. Behind us, the ballroom remained in stunned silence, broken only by Marguerite's furious, disbelieving demands for someone to explain how any of this was possible, and Jonathan's whispered pleas fading into nothing as we walked past 300 guests who would spend the rest of their lives telling this story at dinner parties. The night the missing father turned out to be an emperor, and the family who mocked his daughter lost every banking relationship they had ever built in a single, devastating hour. We walked out through those gilded doors into the cold night air, past the line of tactical guards standing at perfect attention, toward the bulletproof limousine gleaming beneath the hotel's exterior lights, its engine already running, door opening in perfect synchronization as we approached. News helicopters overhead captured every second of it, footage that would circulate across financial and society networks for days, an object lesson in what happens when arrogance mistakes silence for weakness, and cruelty mistakes absence for shame. I did not look back. I did not need to. I already knew exactly what I would see: a family whose financial foundation had just been dismantled in a single evening, a fiancé still kneeling on cold marble, and a room full of people recalculating, too late, every assumption they had ever made about the quiet woman they had spent 2 years underestimating. Inside the limousine, my father sat across from me as we pulled away from the Sterling Grand Hotel, leaving chaos behind us beneath that vaulted glass ceiling. "Are you all right, Serafina?" he asked, using my true name for the first time in 3 years, and it landed on me like warmth, returning to hands that had gone numb. "I am better than all right," I said, watching the hotel shrink in the rear window. "I finally understand something I should have recognized from the beginning. A family that measures your worth by your father's visible presence at a party was never capable of measuring anything that actually matters. True power, I have learned across a lifetime spent watching my father govern a nation without ever once raising his voice, does not need to shout to prove itself. It does not need to defend an absent parent against cruel speculation at a dinner party, because it already knows the truth does not require an audience's permission to exist. True power sits quietly in a hospital records office, wearing scrubs and driving a car with a rattling door, and when it is finally provoked into revealing itself, it does not argue or plead for understanding. It simply makes one phone call and watches an entire family's carefully cultivated status and their access to every dollar that mattered to them collapse into dust within the span of a single humiliating hour. Marguerite Ashdown and everyone who stood beside her that evening walked away from that ballroom with a firm, still standing, but hollowed of every credit relationship that had ever mattered to it. Jonathan Ashdown walked away with a broken engagement and a career he would spend years trying to rebuild without the connections his mother's cruelty had cost him. And I walked away with exactly what I had arrived with: my true name, my composure, and the absolute certainty that I would never again allow anyone to mock what they did not have the imagination to understand. What did you think of this masterful revenge? Did Marguerite and her family get exactly what they deserved for mocking a father they knew nothing about? If you loved watching arrogant elites lose everything the moment they discovered exactly who they had been humiliating, smash that like button, share this story with everyone you know who believes in real justice, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of karma, quiet power, and the devastating cost of underestimating the Woman sitting quietly at your own dinner table.